Good day and welcome back to another World of Warcraft video. In this video we're going to talk about leveling with a twink and essentially why it's so fast, how to set yourself up, everything you need to know, commonly asked questions, a dungeon run, and basically how the whole thing works. So it's a very simple process actually, and it's going to be divided in this video into two parts. The first part will be about setting up the twink run and how to do it. The second part will be talking a little bit more about the actual twink whilst diving into a run. So the first thing you're going to need to do is have a level 70 character. A level 70 main character that you have usually and generally speaking to have an optimal twink gotten a couple of the accessories on. So obviously you get a ring and a trinket pretty easily. You also get a trinket standard for hitting level 70. You're going to want these alongside, if you can, possibly getting the amulet. Now I know it's difficult because of how the scaling and everything works when you first initially hit endgame, but ideally if you can at least get the trinket, the ring and the other trinket, giving yourself 3 accessories, this will give you the ability to make your twink quite overpowered quite early on. And this is very crucial. So having this done before you even consider doing this process is generally what I would say you need to do before you even consider doing this, although you can get away with just the 1 accessory. Now in terms of the actual twinking process, it's very simple. You will have a character that is on a starter account. I'll show you how to set that up, and they will party up with a character that you have on your main account. The starter account will share everything with your main account, including the bonus for your cape, everything, all the bonuses, etc. Now the big thing with this method is it can take very quick. Because the character is locked to level 20, you basically have incredible scaling because of your cloak. This allows the character to quickly ascend through dungeons, clearing out mobs very easily. We'll talk a bit more about classes and things later on when we get to the twink section, but the reason this method works so well is because of that scaling mechanism. So with your twink setup, which you can see I'm on a level 20 character here on the starter account, which we'll talk about now, they are able to solo clear dungeons, thus giving your other character basically free reign to just stand still and soak up EXP. And because all the bosses drop EXP, that character will be able to collect it out their mail. Now setting up a starter account is very easy. It takes around 2 minutes. If you don't have one already, if you didn't start with one, you can very easily just log into your Battle.net account. Once you're at your Battle.net account, you can go to account settings, then go to games and subscriptions. And once you're at the games and subscriptions, then you'll be able to add in a starter account. Very easy, super duper simple. Once that has been added in, you'll be ready to go and able to open up a starter account whilst playing your main account. It's important you have to have both games open because obviously your characters have to party up with each other. Now let's talk a little bit about the twink. So the twink will be on the starter account. Obviously they will hit level 20, and once they get there they'll stop earning EXP. Now setting up the twink does require a little bit of effort. It's going to take you around an hour and a half because you still need to kind of get them to an efficient level. It's not just about hitting level 20, although that does help and they are very powerful at that level. But for them to truly start one-shotting dungeons, you're going to have to put a little bit of work in. Getting them some Tinker Gems, getting them all of their accessories from the vendor, which shouldn't be too hard. Getting them, obviously, maybe a couple threads in that. A lot of it will be refined as you continue to use them. So the more you use your set twink, the stronger it'll get, and the faster your subsequent level 70 runs will go. Once you do have your twink set up, open both games. So you can see here I'm on my character I want to level. Open up both games and set them up in a party. So as you can see here, obviously I'm adding my twink as a friend. I'm now switching over to that game, going to add them into the party, and then we're going to be able to progress and level together. It's as simple as that. Once they're in the same party, you can queue them up for dungeons, queue them up for heroic dungeons, random ones, and as you clear those dungeons with your twink, you will get a ton of drops, XP, bronze, etc. It's literally as straightforward as that. I'll go through around a bit later on in the video, but that's everything you need to know. Like I said, if you're doing this super casual, it's going to take you around 4 hours to do. If you are doing this on a more refined twink, it can take you anywhere between 2 to 3 hours. If you're on a really strong one, it can take you about 2 hours. The more you use the twink, the more refined it gets, the more threads it gets, the stronger it's going to be, the quicker you're going to clear dungeons. And a lot of people are doing this method now, so most times just entering the dungeon with your twink generally means you're probably meeting up with someone else's twink. Now, in terms of queues, you do want to have a tank or a healer because queues need to be quick. If you go DPS, the dungeon method's not going to work. Now, let's talk about the actual twink. Okay, so I want to give a bit more details about the actual twink. Let's talk about classes. So there are 4 main classes that are going to be the best for your twink. So essentially, you have Holy Priest, because it's a healer. You have Havoc DH or Vengeance DH. I can't remember which one's the tank. I think it's Havoc. Havoc DH because of the movement speed. Windwalker Monk, okay, which is also a decent selection, though obviously being a DPS. If you can use a DPS if your main character is obviously a tank or a healer, because they're not going to be involved in the dungeon at all. And then you have Guardian Druid. Guardian Druid, also a solid option. You can mix and match depending on what you need. For example, if you're leveling a healer or a tank, you don't need to have your twink be a healer or a tank. They can be a DPS. But all 4 of these classes tend to work pretty well as a twink. Now let's talk getting your twink up to speed a little bit. So getting your twink up to speed, before we talk about optimization, tinker gems and everything, mainly you want to do questing. So the reason you want to mainly do questing is because of a couple of reasons. So the first reason that you want to mainly do questing, if you automatically jump into dungeons with your twink, yes, they will gain a lot of experience super duper fast, but they will actually gain so much experience that they're going to be missing item pieces, they're going to hit level 20, they're not going to have a little bit of bronze stashed away. You want to have these things. Questing on your twink is going to be quite important. It's one of the earlier ways to just get pieces to fill up your slots. Yes, once you start to do heroic dungeons with the twink, it'll start to refine itself. So for example, once I start to do heroic dungeons with them, they can start to replace their green pieces with blue gear. They will start to earn bronze and threads, which will enable your character to start scaling really heavily. All of these things are incredibly good. However, to get there, or to even start moving them, generally questing is the best way. It just allows you, by the time you hit level 20, to probably have a green piece in every slot, to have a nice little collection of at least somewhat basic level prismatic gems, hopefully 1 or 2 blues, and then also to have a decent-ish collection of tinker gems, because of how the reward boxes work from quests. So once you have all of that, and once you've got to level 20, you can quest a little bit more. Like I said, it's going to take you about an hour or 2 to really set this up nicely so that the twink works really well. But honestly, the majority of the refinement will occur the more you use them. Like I said, every single heroic they do is going to make them stronger and stronger and stronger. Now, let's talk about specifics. So refinement for your twink is broken down into several sections. Firstly, let's talk a little bit about gear. So obviously you want to have every slot full, but more important than anything is your gems. Going to the Infinite Time Bazaar, speaking to Lindomaru, will give you the option to pick up firstly your rings and trinkets that you have, adding them to the character, very important. And you may want to consider filling up your tinker gem slots. Cogwheel, meta gem is super important, and we'll talk about what the best ones are. But generally speaking, you need to fill up your tinker gem slots. So let's talk about which gems are great. So on the meta gem side, Chi-Ji, the bird, is the best one. Huge movement speed buff, great for speedrunning. Oblivion Sphere is also good in the beginning when you need DPS, and Bulwark of the Bronze Ox is also pretty decent. On the cogwheel side, Blink is great, but you can very easily go for Roll, Sprint, Stampeding Roar, any kind of movement speed buff. Then on the Tinker Gem side, you generally want 3 of them, and the 4th one can be whatever. Remember, your level 20 character only has access to 4 Tinker Gems at a time. So in terms of Tinker Gems, we're looking for Searing Light, Slay, Victory Fire, if you're a melee class, Double Strike, or you can go Incendiary Fire, you can go for Overloading Rod, you can go for anything really with the Force slot. It's not that big a deal. Generally, anything that increases your haste, so Enkindle is pretty good. All those type of things are going to be really, really solid. Enkindle also gives you a little bit of survivability and damage, so that's really great. Now, in terms of stats, so obviously in terms of talking raw stats and what kind of stats you want, this is where you need to look at your gear. So we want to avoid avoidance. Leech is fine, but mainly we're looking at crit. We want crit, we want haste, we want mastery. Versatility is also good. Anything that's going to scale our damage. Big ones are going to be crit, big ones are going to be haste, big ones are going to be versatility, depending on your class. Crit and versatility are going to be your big primary damage buffers, mastery as well. Everything else is going to depend on your class, but those are going to be your big ticket items to improving yourself. And then finally, we want to look at the quests. Threads. So threads, your character starts with a ton of them, but it doesn't start with a ton of them in terms of secondary stats. A lot of your threads are basically in stamina, primary stats, and EXP gain. Obviously your character can't gain EXP, so now the refinement process of your twink comes down to threads. The more dungeons you run, the more dailies you complete, the more threads your twink's going to have, and like I said, every subsequent leveling of a character will make this twink even stronger. You're never going to change the twink. The twink will get stronger and stronger as you go along, using them over and over. From there, that's pretty much it. You don't need to do anything else with the twink at this point. Once you have them start rolling through heroic missions, picking up blue gear, picking up threads, picking up gems, you can continue to refine them. Like I said, the more accessories you have, you'll get there. They'll get higher level gems. You don't need to worry too much. One thing you can consider doing is obviously expending bronze to roll for certain gems, but these will also just drop naturally. You'll get there. Your twink won't start at 100% efficiency, but very quickly after leveling your character for about an hour or an hour or two, you'll find that your twink gets to pretty much optimal efficiency or close to it, where you're able to really run dungeons super quickly. And like I said, most times you're going to find a twink that kind of rolls with you. So now finally, let's look at the dungeon run. So as you can see, we have both characters in the dungeon. You don't need to have the main character standing in the actual dungeon. So this is the twink obviously running through. You can see in this dungeon. Fortunately for me, I found another twink. This is going to be very common, by the way. On the main character, you can see they're standing at the beginning. Obviously, they themselves are not doing too much. You can even teleport them out the dungeon. It's not a big issue. On your twink, you're going to run the dungeon. Now, if you are in the situation where you have another one, fantastic, it's no problem. Depending on your class, obviously you're going to have certain spammable abilities. For example, on Holy Priest, it's going to be Holy Nova. On Guardian Druid, it'll be something like Rend. This is very important. Don't worry so much about looting all the bosses. You can see me doing that there. Everything gets sent to your post box. The big thing with the twink is going to be collecting those gems and continuing to boost their power. So don't just ignore the twink. When you finish each dungeon, claim the threads on the twink, get yourself gems, do all these things. Another bonus, as you saw me highlight there, is Lucky Draw. Lucky Draw is a big bonus because of a lot of reasons. Firstly, by doing random dungeons, you get more XP. This is always a buff. But on top of that, Lucky Draw gives you a 15% increase to damage and health, which is very, very crucial when we're trying to talk about how functional and like how quick our run is going to be. So it's a very, very important process in determining your overall success. When you finish the dungeon, you're going to get a bunch of rewards and hopefully complete some daily quests for your twink and your main character. Remember to take the daily quests on both. Although you are going to be mainly running dungeons, don't forget that you can run raids if you really feel like it. But ideally, if you really want to speed this, you're solely running dungeons. You don't need to panic about things like EXP buffs. Yes, EXP buff on the cape does help with leveling, but because of the rate at which you're gaining experience from the dungeon, you actually don't need to worry about your main character. On top of that, you're pretty much done. Your main character just needs to basically sit and chill by the mailbox, and they'll be able to collect themselves a ton of their rewards and make your life a lot easier. So this has kind of been a very, I guess detailed, but this is the big process in terms of obviously running twinks and running them quite well. A big thing you need to understand ultimately about this process is that, as a player, it's a great method for leveling characters, but the primary reason for leveling characters in this specific event is for the bronze. Essentially, it's a way for players to make 50,000 bronze every 3 hours. So in a day, if you really wanted to, you could probably run and make yourself over hundreds of thousands of bronze, get all the mounts and things you want, and call it a day, since the in-game grind for bronze on one character is pretty tough. The last couple things, so is it against terms of service? No, it's not. It's basically, twinking is not against TOS. Using a starter account like this is not against TOS. They could look at ways of nerfing it, but it's also very unlikely. It would require them to change a lot of the rules around how starter accounts work. They could remove starter accounts from accounts once, obviously, they begin their own official subscription, but that remains to be seen. And then finally, should you do this? I think it's something that's really cool on paper, but I think for a lot of the casual players, it's just not something you need to worry about. You'll get enough bronze eventually doing LFG. But that's it from me. See you guys next time. Bye.